Despite the improvements made in continuity and resilience over the last decade, there are still a vast number of organisations lagging behind. The evidence would suggest we need to take a hard look at the gap between the perception of preparedness and the reality. With me today I have Mike Osborne, Managing Director of Business Continuity at Phoenix. Thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Hello, Deborah.
Now, many in the industry would agree that business continuity and resilience capabilities are at their highest level ever. But is this leading us towards a false sense of security?
I think there's two aspects to the answer to that. On the one hand, we're now into our third decade of what we would see as modern day business continuity practices and capability. Lots of incidents over those 3 decades that have honed business continuity, capability and opinion. My concern is that we have a really polarised economy when it comes to those that take business continuity very seriously and are at the upper echelons of what people would say is a heightened level of preparedness, and those that quite frankly are not. And you'd be surprised at how quickly you go from the very highest echelon of preparedness and drop down. And only recently the Times covered a report on the government's concern about the cooperative bank. Now most people I think would say the cooperative bank, huge organisation, highly regulated, they would be at the top of their game. The Times report suggested that the government is concerned around their technology infrastructure, and it specifically quotes a lack of end-to-end disaster recovery capability. And on the back of that, the government is minded to try and find a larger, more capable organisation that can handle those two concerns. Now, I'm not here to judge the co-op bank. I'm not aware of the details, but it is an example of how quickly you go from being highly prepared as a brand that would be expected to do so, and perhaps at a level that even though you're highly regulated, that you simply don't tick all the boxes.
Mm-hmm. What is the reality of preparedness then, would you say, across the UK as a whole? How accurate a picture do studies draw of the rest of the country?
I think the devil is in the detail around statistics, and as an industry we're absolutely on a journey from disaster recovery that was with its foundations in IT only through into complete resilience, organisational resilience, not just of infrastructure and technology but of people and processes, but we've only really just started that journey. I mentioned devil in the detail. If I give you 2 examples of recent studies, one was a European-wide study based on cyber preparedness on European firms with more than 1,000 employees, and the headline level was 86% say they are prepared for a cyber attack. There was a next layer of detail that said 40% actually had a plan. So it says, well, okay, how are you prepared if you haven't had a plan? It then said 30% test regularly. Now, if you do the maths, the best case analysis is that 30% have something that could be relied upon, but if that 30% is actually relating to the 40% that have a plan, my maths suggests that that's about 12%. So the headline is 86% prepared, the reality is 12% are actually testing. So that's if you like at a European big company level. If you look at the SME marketplace, a report in October last year that I noted suggested that just under 70% of SMEs had a business continuity plan. But again, devil in the detail, it also suggested that 1 in 6 didn't know what a business continuity plan was when they were asked, and then 30% still didn't have a plan. Now again, if you take that testing percentage that the previous report for the European-wide cyber preparedness of 30% tested a plan, you can apply the same maths and very quickly see how something that seems to be positive reduces to actually a very small number. And my concern is that we're building an economy that is built on large, very prepared, very capable organisations, but with a high dependency on SMEs. And I think in particular it's the SMEs where the real challenge lies.
So how can we address this gap between the perception and the reality?
I think those reports have a part to play. I think we need to be clear in the information that we publish and very concise about what it really means. I personally feel that business continuity has become a convenient vehicle for new firms trying to sell new propositions to marketplace to do some form of research without really understanding the marketplace and what those results mean. So I think certainly whether it be CIR as a publisher or Phoenix as a provider, we have a role to play in publicising the real facts. Over and above that, coming back to the firms themselves, what's really clear is that we need to engage at that senior management level so that they really understand what's going on. There's a saying that there's only one thing worse than not having a plan, and that's thinking you have a plan that actually really doesn't work. So having the engagement of senior management is really important, and understanding the pace of change in business and what that means to your business continuity plan. In our experience, when we work with customers, there's ordinarily some form of external pressure that's driving the need to update a plan. You've got a regulatory visit, you've got a key customer that has asked you the question, you're about to be floated on the stock exchange and you have to have a clear risk management and business continuity plan that can be audited for the flotation. These sorts of incidents in an organisation's life cycle drive business continuity. But what then tends to happen is once that initial frenzy of activity to create the plan has happened, it decays over time, particularly if it's not a living, breathing plan. And coming back to my earlier comment about the reliance on SMEs by these larger, more mature firms, within our own customer base, we saw huge progress going through the millennium and through the noughties in SMEs adopting business continuity. We've seen a significant withdrawal from the marketplace over the last 2 years, particularly in the SME sector, where I think organisations have changed, maybe cost pressures because of the economic climate of the last few years have meant that the reasons for the business continuity plan being put in place are now forgotten by the latest managers. And therefore, if the large firms haven't questioned the SME supply chain, over the last 12 months, what we're seeing in terms of technology change and attitudes towards previously long-term contractual arrangements, I would see that is a huge change that is probably going under the radar of most large organisations that have a business continuity plan.
I was going to ask what patterns emerge among those businesses that are prepared and those that are lagging behind.
It's a good question, and it's sort of comes back to the point that I made about those incidents in a company's life cycle that drive the business continuity plan. We're seeing regulated firms, and in particular the change from the old FSA structure to the FCA and PRA. The FCA is spending more time on the smaller financial services firms, and we're seeing a real uptick in inquiries around how we can take those firms from not having much of a plan to being able to go through an FCA audit. They're not large firms, so they lack the expertise, they lack the experience, and therefore they look at Phoenix to provide that to them on an ad hoc basis. We're also seeing the third sector, the charity sector. Again, the link there is that they're a regulated sector. You get a lot of people giving their time to charities and boards of charities. So we're seeing some of the expertise taken from the large non-execs and directors through into the charity sector. And it's really interesting, isn't it, to think that you've got charities that are taking business continuity more seriously, yes, and yet you've got SMEs who don't have the resources in the event that they have a problem to fall back on like the big firms do. So it really could be the difference between make or break, and yet those SMEs, according to what we're seeing, are the ones that are turning their back on business continuity.
How have RTOs changed in recent years, and what's realistic today in terms of recovery?
It's a good question, and in my 25 years this has probably been the biggest revolution that I've seen. The advent of cloud technology, virtualisation, has meant that you can now recover far quicker than ever before. Most firms now if they put their mind to the technology, look at integrating it in part into their day-to-day operations, should be able to recover within 4 hours, certainly critical systems. Now, going back 20 years ago, that would have been the bastion of the big banks. It would have been twin sites. It would have been duplicate everything, twice the money, and the big banks could afford it. The small organisations couldn't. So what they can now do is, for example, they can back up into the cloud, which removes the need for tapes to be transported, to build the technology, to then read the tapes, and to stand for 24, 48 hours whilst the tapes recover. You can call all that out, you can take backups from the cloud, put them straight onto virtual servers, and as I've said, within 4 hours, you stand a chance of being able to be back up and running. Now, all of that can be integrated into your day-to-day operations. You no longer got tapes to ship around, so that can help fund the cloud backup. So you're starting to merge expenditure on day-to-day operations with a little bit of business continuity in a way that makes you highly recoverable in a shorter time frame than you've ever done before. So that's been the biggest revolution that I've seen, and it's happened really quickly, and there's more to come over the next 6 to 12 months.
You talked earlier about scenario testing. Why do you think the testing statistics are so low?
That's a really good question. It's also tied into the RTO answer, because what we've seen from our cloud backup and recovery customers is in excess of 80% of those customers are now testing. And that's against under 40% of our customers that test on a regular basis that aren't using those technologies. So that makes you stand back and say, well, why is that? Well, I think people struggle for resource when they're trying to arrange a test. The complexity of the logistics of pulling all the component parts together means that it's an overhead in terms of planning. I think also there's an element of fear. If they haven't tested before, if it fails, will they be judged? Will they be in trouble? Could they be fired? So all those things come together. Now, if you can simply make a telephone call and say, would you kick off the recovery from my cloud backup vault, please? Will you put that data onto the virtual servers? And can I connect via a secure connection? And all that is done for you as a managed service. Then you could see how the fear element would disappear because you've outsourced that whole capability to your provider. And you can also see that the resource is significantly reduced. You can stay in your office doing your job whilst other people are doing the recovery. So I think it is incumbent on us as an industry and us as a supplier to try and find ways to make sure that firms can test. Because as I've said earlier, those statistics around the people who test versus those people who've got a plan are really quite frightening. And if we can do things to close that gap, then we'll be doing our bit in terms of making the firms more prepared than they currently are.
In summary, what's the reality of resilience among organisations in the UK, and how can it be improved?
I go back to my earlier answer. Those at the top echelons, highly regulated, those that are made to do it are probably as prepared as they've ever been. But we very quickly drop through to the next layer where we're reliant on best practice and the buying of management to make sure that business continuity is taken seriously. And I think that's where the key challenge lies. So we need to educate, but we also, I think, need to reinvent ourselves. I talked earlier about the industry moving from recovery to resilience, and that's just terminology, but what do we do as a provider in terms of making our products and services more relevant? So I believe that we need to provide more managed support, particularly to the SMEs that don't have the expertise and the resilience. I think we need to look at the newer products and services so that we can reinvent products and services. And I feel now that there is a next generation of offerings, whether that be work area recovery that allow people to connect from home, or a work area recovery centre, or on a mobile device, and that's managed seamlessly in terms of telephony and the desktop experience. I think in terms of server recovery and data recovery, that combination of production as well as disaster recovery can come together more seamlessly, more cost effectively. And if we can take some of the strain off those organisations in terms of their ability to do the testing, then a combination of managed services, new invented services that are more cost effective, that recover people more rapidly, that provide more support, I think that wrapper around a general campaign of awareness would go a long way to improving preparedness.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for watching.